Spyro the Dragon, Insomniac Games' breakthrough title of 1998. It's the game that served as the foundation for entertainment during my early childhood years. The game that built so many different interests and concepts for me as a gamer now. Concepts such as the high fantasy genre of From Software's Dark Souls games, or the open expansive exploration of Unknown World's Subnautica franchise. And it even completes the checkmarks of achievement collection lists from Team Cherry's indie game Hollow Knight. You can bundle all of these different elements together, and you're given peak enjoyment in the form of a tiny purple dragon. Spyro is held very near and dear to my heart for this reason, and I've decided that now maybe it's finally time to give the little purple guy the attention and recognition that he deserves. And while his name is plastered across countless games and many different franchises, a collectathon can only be as good at the end of the day as its best levels. So, I would like to welcome you to a passion project I've always thought about over the years, but never really had the means to make it into a reality. Until today. Today, you and I are going to embark on our own little journey through the Dragon Realms. And together, we're going to explore what makes each of Spyro's levels interesting, exciting, beautiful, or drab. We'll form a conclusion on why some levels belong below the swamps of the Beastmakers, but also how some even surpass the lofty estates above the Dreamweavers. But before we dive in, we need to establish some ground rules first. First off, this is going to be a very biased and opinionated ranking. As much as I would love to remain as objective as possible when talking about the levels, and I do try to for the majority of them, I will periodically be mentioning personal anecdotes and perspectives on what I enjoy or don't enjoy. This is my ranking and my opinions on levels that I like to play or levels that I absolutely cannot stand. So should a particular level stand out to me in a fond way, chances are it's going to get some brownie points sprinkled around here or there. While on the contrary, should there be any levels that I absolutely cannot stand, well, I would hope that you would get the idea. However, all of my personal opinions aside, there is a rough structure for how I've created this aggregate ranking system. I'll largely be judging each level on 3 separate different criteria. Aesthetics. Does the level look appealing? Does it fit the vibe given by the name and the homeworld? What defining elements are unique to the level that make it stand out against the sea of other levels in the game? Enemy design. How are the enemies made? Are they unique to the level, or are they shared across several different ones? Are there any special elements to how you're supposed to defeat them? Or are they easy or difficult in order to fight? How enjoyable are they to go toe-to-toe with? Collectability. How much fun is the level to play through? Are there a bunch of impossible glides that you have to make time and time again? Or perhaps loads of backtracking through portions of the level that are completed, so they're just empty expanses now? What about stray gems sprinkled around open areas that are more of a chore to collect? This is the defining point that determines whether the level is a yay or a nay to play. I'll also be making some slight comments to Stuart Copeland's amazing score for the game, and all of the audio for this video is done on the Reignited trilogy, but with the classic music instead of the Reignited versions. I'm no musician, and I'm far from an expert when it comes talking about musical scoring, but I will try to throw in a little nod here and there based off of how good I feel the vibe is given by his expertise. And these are just some of the baseline questions I've asked about each of the levels to form responses on. Obviously, we'll be talking about more than just these 3 elements, but they serve as a good base to build off of. So now, with all of that said and done, I believe it's finally time to begin our discussion on how each Spyro the Dragon level ranks against its companions. And where do we start anything if not with the very bottom? This level has a rather bland skybox that doesn't really stand out much. The stars above, high in the sky, are a nice touch, but the majority of the visible portion of the far reaches, it's just a gradient, and I find that rather boring. I will give it some points for the haze towards the bottom being very representative of a bog, but that might be about where it ends. The swamp trees of the Beastmaker's homeworld are present, as are all of the wooden spears in all the other Beastmaker levels, so there's not really too much that makes it stand out design-wise. The hollowed out tree stump opening up down to an underground root section below is pretty cool design and a unique set piece, but that's the only thing in this level. Nothing else really stands out with a large enough impact to make it superb to explore or look at on its own. When we start talking about the enemies, we have just your typical armored Norks that require charging in order to dispatch. There's no special defining elements to separate them from other enemies. They do have some cool outfit pieces though, but at the end of the day, they are just a generic enemy. We also see reused pigs from the homeworld that shows up later in our ranking as well, but I think the main talking point that everybody knows about this level is the goddamn killer attack frogs. I'm serious, when an enemy gets a call out from a collectible in the game, you know that they're going to be a force to be reckoned with. Seriously, why in the world is the ending to this level such a fustercluck that it feels like you're storming the beaches of Normandy with how absurdly difficult it is? That little section that's all enclosed off of the main path, I swear that gives me PTSD nightmares from this level every single time I have to run through it. That little cavern is filled to the brim with the turds. When it goes to playing the level, it's a large 500 gem expanse that's relatively straightforward though. It does split about halfway through the level into two long individual paths, both of which will ultimately require backtracking though through the completed sections regardless of which one you decide to go first, whether that's through the cavern with the frogs or through the tree route down to the underpath. And while there aren't really too many hidden gems that are easy to miss, the only noteworthy element that stands out when 100%ing the level is that war zone with all of the frogs inside. I'm really not even sure if it's impossible to escape it unscathed. You're likely to lose all of your spark stacks and maybe even a couple of lives each time you try to run through it. I'm really not trying to be hella biased against this level because of these reasons, but in full honesty, I'm gonna be hella biased against this level. Before we dive into what makes Crystal Flight the second worst level in my ranking, we need to go over a few ground rules first for these levels. You see, flight levels are going to be in a weird spot with this ranking. They're more arcade style rather than the conventional collection level like everything else in the game, and so they deserve to be spoken about a tad bit differently. While the design discussion can be retained for how the level looks, there's not really typical enemies in these flight levels. So rather than talking about them, we're largely going to be focused on what objectives are in the flights and how they feel to complete. The collectability section is largely going to be talking about the paths needing to be taken to reach 100% completion. If you have to go way far out of your way or do some insane maneuvers in order to make it on time within the limit, that's where the completionist is going to be talked about. With all of that, let's actually talk about Crystal Flight here. Overall, in summary, it's probably the lamest flight level in my honest opinion. The objectives are run-of-the-mill that we've seen from other flight levels in our ranking by the time you get to here, and there's nothing unique to set them apart. The skybox is pretty lackluster here, honestly. It doesn't really have any real designs to make it stand out. The only real focal point is just the moon high in the sky. The crystals that dot the landscape, while they are the main point of the level, don't glow nearly as vividly as their counterparts in some of the other levels. All in all, this feels like it was the first attempt at a flight level that got improved upon further and further with each additional attempt in the other worlds later on in the ranking. When it comes to playing it, there's really not a whole lot to say about it. The pattern that you're supposed to take is even super straightforward. There's no point in variation. It's not a hard flight level whatsoever. Honestly, I feel the only difficulty that comes with this is sometimes I feel I can do the opening objectives of the rings and the archways a little too quickly. By the time I make it to the planes, I feel like I'm ahead of the rotation of the map, and I ultimately have to end up doing a loop around to be able to catch up to them properly. Otherwise, I'm gonna miss one and have to do another larger loop, which ends up wasting more time. I'm not sure if that's the intended method, but it's something that I have to contend with each time I decide to load up this level. The aesthetics of the Alpine Ridge are clad with the snow-topped mountaintops that are a staple of Magic Crafters worlds. The level is very reliant on Spyro's glide capabilities, and as a result of that, we can see that it really sells the ridge part of its name. You truly do feel like you're climbing your way through the mountains as you move from rocky surface to the next. It's got a nice mixture of open mountain air combined with dark tunnels through the cliffs to hide collectibles and hidden extensions of the level. It's a pretty staple representation of Magic Crafters at the end of the day, though. There's not too much that really makes it jump out, and there's not a big wow factor with how it looks. With regards to the enemies, we can see reused mage enemies from the Magic Crafters homeworlds. Again, they're just basic regular charge enemies that don't really have any unique elements to them. But we do also get to see our quirky environmental wizards from other levels. The unique enemies of the furry Yeti monsters is also nice to not have everything in this level be a bunch of copy-paste. But they're just typical flame enemies that are large, and while they do have a unique jump and leap attack, they're not too difficult to fight or anything. The egg thief that's hidden at the end of the level after the long glide is one of the more difficult ones with how fast he can feel cutting a few of those corners. When playing through it, it's a very linear level with one or two hidden sections requiring far-reaching glides in order to reach successfully. It's a large level which can be kind of annoying with how long it takes to glide from ridge to ridge. If you're looking for maybe just one or two missing gems, you're going to spend more time in the air waiting for Spyro to land than actually running around looking. The enemies, while very boring, aren't annoying to fight really. The egg thief is fast and might be one of the longest chase sequences in the entire playthrough, I think. But the one thing that I feel that does deserve a massive shout out is that whoever invented the triple explosive chest glide section at the end of the level, that's insane. I'm being serious, it's literally the worst. Whoever thought that that was okay to put into the game was insane with how difficult they are to do in a timely manner. Overall, Alpine Ridge is one that I don't necessarily hate, but it's just not one of my favorites. I mean, I'm really not a big fan of those final 30 gems to grab, but I do have to say in the Reignited trilogy, being able to launch mage enemies for some reason off of Yeti's backs into the Grand Beyond is hilarious to watch. The big bad boss man finds himself in the bottom trifecta of our list. A little unfortunate for him, I have to say. But he does get a good big skybox though. The vivid purple night sky matches perfectly with the primary color of our favorite little dragon. The metallic level design of the Shipyard Harbor aesthetic of Nasty's world is on full display here. The tunnels that feel like an underground bunker haven stretch all over the level, entwining around. The exterior sections support a collection of steam and liquid pipes that are pumping resources to places who knows where. The second half of the level, once you get outside, really starts to show the absurd number of modifications that Nasty's made to his other worlds. The large, goopy crater at the center of his level serves as the foundation for all of his production and resource gathering. Everything stems from the central point here. This is his home base of operations. The second part of the chase is pretty cool though, as it leads you down an almost last resort tunnel where the ending of the game ultimately takes place. It's a final panic room with no way out. This is the ending point where everything's led to. Unfortunately, in regards to the enemies, Nasty, while being very big and foreboding with his design and ominous stature, is more of a letdown than even some of the weakest bosses later on in our ranking. I truly wish this was a good boss fight. I mean, I wish that this was a boss fight in general. But all the Nork wants to do is run away. He's the living embodiment of all bark and no bite. While he does have some very rare attacks that involve trying to crystalify you with his magic mace, the majority of the level is spent just chasing thieves for keys or chasing the Nork himself. But I just hope that the final boss of the game had a little more oomph to it. When playing through it, this is a level that is the epitome of linear design. It's really nothing more than 3 separate tunnel sections with one way in and one way out. There are gems sprinkled around the edges, but since their only way forward is to go straight, it's virtually impossible to miss anything on a run-through should you take your time. It doesn't mean that it's necessarily impossible to miss anything. I did miss a literal 1 gem on my playthrough. But the level forces backtracking, and potentially upwards of 3 times depending on how speedy you are with catching the thieves and Nasty. If you can do it in a timely manner, then you can follow the pathway tunnels casually and gather the stray gems. But on Nasty's chase, you're forced to do at least 2 rotations in order to gather all the gems and make it to him before he hops down. You could potentially do even more should you miss gems on your second run even. Because of this, while the level is relatively easy to complete, it's really repetitive and boring to do, and it doesn't feel engaging or fun to go gem hunting. Overall, Nasty Nork as the final boss is a letdown of a level, unfortunately. I wish that they did so much more to him. Sunny Flight is honestly a little bit basic of a flight level. It's midday with some archways and large blue crystals that serve as the main focus point, but they're not really too remarkable in my opinion. The collection of bridges when you first load in is a cool set piece, but the layout of the level's appearance kind of falls short of that. There's not much else to stand out that captivates your attention amidst the sea of deep blues all around. When playing through the level, none of the objectives are particularly annoying to complete. The only bad ones are potentially the planes that move independent of your own agenda. Should you miss one in their roundabout rotation, you're forced to have to circle back around or drastically adjust your flight pattern in order to compensate for it, but it usually doesn't eat up too much time doing so. The arches that run around the entire level's border are really lackluster, as they even take you to the backside where there's just nothing to look at. It's just a cliff wall and then some open water. It's not the easiest flight level in our ranking, but it's definitely not the hardest. Sunny Flight is one that just really doesn't stand out too much to separate it. I'm not actually 100% certain on what the correct order of attainability is for this level, I've followed a pathway that the super young me deduced from trial and error as a child. Maybe you're supposed to fly through the arches and the tunnels and collect all the trains first before moving to the plains, but I'm not certain. Based off of my experience and how I've handled the level, it falls short of standing out. It's actually kind of problematic when you think about it, when the most decisive element of a level is the secret method used to unlock it, and not anything about the level itself actually. Blowhard has a magnificent storm skybox that dots all around the edges of the map, and it is a great representation of the weather pattern going on. We do get to see our Magic Crafter mountains copy-pasted in again for an appearance, but at least this time they're joined by massive windmills blowing hard in the background from the storm. The addition of the interior cave section is nice, so we're not just running around a bunch of ramparts and ledges, but once you get in, its design is actually kind of bland. Compared to some of the other interior locations within the world, it just feels really lackluster and could have been much more brighter and magical for magic crafters. But instead of this, it feels pretty stagnant and stale. Much like Dr. Shemp, a boss that ranked much higher on our list, the music here feels a little bit too airy and free-floating for a boss level. It doesn't feel like there's a sense of urgency or ominous presence that's lurking around the corners high in these mountain peaks. As for the namesake of the level himself, well, don't even get me started. While I do love the Storm Wizard's designs and the quirky Wizard Boy's level manipulation of the environment, what in the world is Blowhard, and how is that even considered a boss? He's a tornado man with a long beard that could be cool in design that we've seen maybe in some other elements of media, but instead he looks more like some guy that lives out in the middle of the nowhere. I mean, and even his attacks? I think he only let out a singular move the entire time during the entire level. And I don't even think it was anywhere near me. It was as if he was attacking something else off in the distance. I've seen more threats from the Norks and Sheeps in Artisan's World than from Blowhard himself. Overall, it's a poor level in design, I feel. For having 400 gems, it's by far one of the absolute fastest blitzes through a level of its size. Running around stormy mountaintops could have been such a dope aesthetic with the windmills blowing vigorously in the background, but it's more of a case of pop in, flame a few enemies, and pop out without any real weight attached to anything happening. The level's incredibly linear, not allowing for any variation in how you choose to go about completing it, and just as soon as you feel like the level's finally starting, you're already at the end of it. All in all, Blowhard ends up as a lackluster and letdown boss level that doesn't even feel like a boss, and hardly feels like a level for considering it's halfway through the game. Our first homeworld on the ranking. Nice to see it's not one of the worst. It's the original start of where everything with our favorite little purple dragon began. The Artisan's home offers bright greens and castle towers that are vivid and friendly for starting your game. The dragons, being craftsmen for the Dragon Realms, is a good touch, and I like their aesthetics. Each level section has its own little segment to stand out from the collective whole of the level, which is a nice touch. But it doesn't really look like a world that's inhabited by master crafters. Yeah, sure, there's a hedge maze, but nothing else really looks like it was artificially made by these dragons. The stepping stones by the waterfalls that hide Sunny Flight look natural. The balloonist being on a small pier deck out back with nothing else around. Even Toasty's dragon mouth doesn't look like it was artificially made. It looks like it was always been there and it's been carved. It's nice to look at, but the whole world lacks any definitive features that make it stand out. With it being the first homeworld in the game, we're not really given any enemies that can actually harm us. We only have basic Norks, which do serve as a great introduction to one of the main enemy types of the game. They're harmless, as should be expected from the opening world of the game, and this allows players to get their feet wet with figuring out how they want to handle enemies. There's no charge requirements for them, so players get to decide if they want to go head first or give them a nice little barbecue. The panic that the Norks get on their faces is a nice touch when they finally see Spyro, because they don't have any means to defend themselves, so it's funny to watch them freak out and run away in the first level. It's a small and enclosed homeworld with very short branches reaching out. There's not really any backtracking required or looping around in the sections that you've already done. This is the only case of the 3-hit Norks that we see that drop gems at a single time, which is interesting, and I wonder why we didn't see other versions of this enemy later on in other levels. There are no difficult puzzles or glide sections that are required to reach full completion, and the 100 gems makes the world something that you can load in and complete with relative ease in a quick manner. It's rather basic of a level, but should be expected from the opening homeworld. I will give some bonus points for the Dragon Head of Toasty mimicking the boss world of Nasty's world at the end of the game, and the hedge maze of Dark Hollow is a big remembrance for my nostalgia. The hidden puzzle that locked Sunny Flight behind the waterfalls was a huge revelation to come back to and discover as a kid. But I do kind of wish that they had kept the hidden state of the puzzle like the original, and didn't give you some sort of visual feedback when you were hopping on the stones. Maybe they could after you had discovered the dragon in Wizard Peak that gave you the hint for it, but I feel like they kind of gave away a lot of the puzzle, and lots of people on a first playthrough could find the level accidentally rather than intentionally looking for it. Cliff Town is, shocker, a town embedded into the side of a cliff. And that's a pretty cool aesthetic. The wraparound layered design is fun to go up, feeling yourself climb higher and higher as you reach each new ledge and level. The sporadically placed buildings that dot the desert around the base of the cliff are nice to explore, but you do have to make sure that you cover every alley and don't miss any gems. The large river trench that separates the expansive upper desert section from the harsh corners of the township is a spectacle to glide over, and at this point in the game, is probably the furthest glide that you're asked to make. When talking about enemies, we see our first instances of bird enemies on posts, and while they are fun to get into charge matches with, the worst part of their design, I feel, is when you actually get to flame them on top of their perches. It makes the gems bounce perfectly on top of them, and Sparks, for whatever reason, isn't exactly the biggest fan with climbing up on those perches. The Nork women of the Peacekeepers make their introductions here and are paired with sending smaller armored enemies running forth to attack Spyro directly. It's nothing too serious worth complaining over, but I do have to give a mention that the Egg Thief here totally cheats with how fast he is. I feel like a lot of the corners that he takes, he's able to clear entirely before I can even pivot the camera around, and so he's not even on screen anymore. The only reason why I feel like I'm allowed to catch him is because he does take one corner by the dragon a little wider than all the other ones he does. Cliff Town is a large level compared to the confines of the smaller Artisan World levels that came prior. The mixtures of tight corners of the town with the openness of the desert ridge is a nice juxtaposition to each other, but it can kind of prove to be a pain should you miss a couple of gems, as there's a lot of ground that you have to scour to make up for here. The hidden glide section behind the starting structure at the beginning of the level is absurdly difficult to discover, and how is anyone supposed to find that on a first playthrough? The introduction to rockets launching at locked gems happens here as well, and it's a nice feature, but it does make having to climb up the structure at the end of the level through the whirlwind over and over again super repetitive. I don't really have much else to summarize Clifftown other than the fact that I really hate that egg thief. He's probably the hardest one to grab in the entire game. Huh. 3 of the 5 flight levels within the bottom third of our total ranking. I wonder what that says about flight levels arcade style compared to normal levels collectathon. Anyways, Icy Flights a rather lackluster flight level. The nighttime skybox is interesting, but it's too similar I feel like to the homeworld of the Dreamweavers. There are some very faint auroras in the sky, but the nighttime vibe is nothing compared to what Night Flight has to show for. The icy aesthetic of being high up in the mountains is a cool design, and flying between tunnels to other mountain openings is unique, but other than that, the level doesn't stand out much visually. The tunnel sections being illuminated by blue glows is a real nice touch though. We see a rather common spread of collectibles that have been copy-pasted from other flight levels so far. However, we do get the introduction of the helipack Norks floating. These little buggers aren't too difficult on their own to deal with, but an awkward path can be taken in order to maintain full completion. Sometimes their upward and downward variants can shift you out of your groove and force you to make a loop back around to try to get back on track with them. It's a wonky flight level that's spread out through a collection of tunnels and open pockets of space to fly around in. Much like Shiny Flight before, and Wild Flight to come much later, I'm not 100% sure on what the best path to take for this level is. In a similar manner to Sunny Flight, I follow an order that I created as a kid, and it's worked ever since, so I figured I'd stick to it. But I could see how the separation of a lot of the objectives could potentially make it difficult. Should you miss one helipad or maybe a chest or lighthouse somewhere, there's no easy way to tell where in the level it can be due to the tight corners and walled off sections. It's not a difficult flight level overall, but the layout could prove potentially confusing to players that aren't entirely familiar with the tunnels and landscaping layout. Nasty's World is a very small level hub with everything nearby and connected. The hazy skybox contains some traces of smog, and the ominous synth tones that share the motif with Toasty is a cool callback this late in the game. I like the design of it being a heavily industrialized port world. The large metallic dragon head spewing smogs really adds to the disastrous nature that Nasty's aiming to do. But I have to feel a little bad not having too much else to comment about the world because of its small size. This is the only homeworld aside from the flight levels that don't have any enemies. So I can't really say anything about them in regard to this level, so it's kind of getting a middle of the ground score. There's no comment. What I can comment on is how the OCD within me gets eaten alive not being able to 100% complete this level on a first run through. You can 100 finish every other level in the game with dragon eggs and dragon collectibles and gems, but Nasty's World decides to lock a few gems behind each of the dragon mouths first. But because it's such a tiny level, it's not the end of the world, since there's no backtracking that you would have to do. It's all around this centralized circular hub, and so going from one dragon mouth to the next doesn't take too much time. This overall summarizes to be a minor note that gnaws at the completionist mindset within me, but if those two chests were outside of Twilight Harbor and Nasty's dragon mouths, you could probably fully gather everything in this level in sub 60, probably even 40 or 30 seconds. It's a cool and ominous vibe, being such a small world compared to the vast expanses of the other homeworlds, and it stands out in that regard. But there's not much else to say because of that fact. I do like how the dragons that you rescue in all of his levels in this world hail from the other various worlds, and they're actually all dragons that you've rescued before. So it's cool to see that there are other dragon heads from each of the other homeworlds coming in and trying to help out Spyro's adventure. That is a nice touch, so I can give it props there. This is a level very similar in design to its homeworld. The tall sandstone walls and cacti darting the landscape does make it very canyon-esque. It's paired with an open-endedness of the tunnel section that really shows off the sheer verticality of some of these cliffs. The structures being built into the natural rock faces is a great touch to show that the level design is carved into the landscape of the level, rather than just kind of shoehorning its way through it with no regards. The hidden glide section through the tunnel and around the interior of the level is a good shift in perspective to show the vastness of the canyon now that you're in the open and beyond the confines of the steep walls. For enemies, the armored Norks are just another common variety of enemies that you've seen at this point. They require nothing more than a charge to dispatch, but I can give them a couple extra points as they've added the potential for projectiles to have to dodge. So that separates them from any other copy-paste armored enemy. The larger variants are funny to see as they use birds as a weapon, and I can only imagine the damage that those poor little buzzards have to endure with every swing made. But neither of them are problematic to fight. While the egg thief at the beginning of the level can sometimes feel a little unfair with how he cuts his corners, with the use of some clever level resources, it makes dispatching him a moment of pure and absolute comedy, and it feels great to be rewarded for thinking outside of the box. The level is vast and expansive and can sometimes feel a little overwhelming for coming early in the game. With 400 gems to have to collect, should you miss one, you're definitely going on a much larger hunt compared to the smaller levels of the first world. It forces you to split midway through the level, deciding if you want to stay within the canyon walls or circle around the outside to the open cliff face. It means that ultimately, at one point or another, you're gonna have to do a little bit of backtracking through portions you've already visited. The large glide around the interior of the canyon is a good puzzle to reward map awareness, but the long glide to the isolated island that's far away will always sketch me out with how close it gets cut sometimes. Dry Canyon is a pretty middle of the ground level to explore and collect, but I have to reiterate that killing egg thieves with tumbler projectiles is an absolute hoot. Metalhead's purple skybox is different from the mesh of greens that the other Beastmaker levels have, so that's a nice touch. Here we get to see the epitome of all the development that the Norks have done to the homeworld, which is actually kind of funny considering there's not a single Nork enemy in the game. The place is long gone from wooden spears and swamp huts that are at the start of the world, and it's fully embraced its electrical futurization. The large stone structure and metal designs on enemies make it stand out from other Beastmaker levels. The green sludge could even be made as an excuse of byproduct from the industrialization undergoing constantly. The first half of the level being open and almost compound-esque is neat when compared to the underground power plant design where the boss fight takes place. Here, we get to see a smaller variant on the monkey enemies from Treetops, which, heavy spoiler alert, we won't be seeing for a hot minute. The large variants are copy-paste from the level though, but the small ones have buckets on their head. So that's cool. As for Metalhead himself, he might potentially be even more of a letdown than Blowhard was. The robot's attacks are so pathetic you can't help but accidentally dodge all of them. The concept of a massive robot being behind industrialization of the swamp is cool, but he really doesn't do too much to defend that title. The fight would be cooler if you potentially had to bait out the monkeys he'd throw into the charging pillars, but the fact that you can just charge blindly into them makes it not really even feel like you're fighting him. As things currently stand, he doesn't feel like a boss at all, as you don't even have to interact with him at all to defeat him. With 500 gems to collect and a hidden section beneath a broken grate that's neat to explore, Metalhead's a decent level to collect. You do get to grab a key and head to a locked chest behind a waterfall, and that's a cool hidden secret. The level's full of different pathways to hidden treasures that don't really require any backtracking through already completed sections. But if you miss a stray gem, it might come back to bite you in the butt. And I could feel like that could happen pretty commonly if a rolling monkey decides to collide with some terrain and you forget to collect his drop. But the level shouldn't be too difficult to 100%. The green night skybox here is pretty to look at. The heavy focus on wooden structures at the start of the level blends with the village aesthetic of the swamps of the Beastmakers. The back half of the level being a largely electrified structure is a cool contrast to the almost underdeveloped vibe given by the start of the level. The bass line strumming in the background acts as a consistent thrum like the power of electricity surging constantly through the pads all over the level. Speaking of the pads, we get to see our little small electric Norks here that hail from the homeworld again. But this time, they're accompanied not by pigs, but larger Norks that require a flame to dispatch. Their electric chainsaw zappers are pretty cool, and they aren't too difficult to fight on their own. But when you pair them with the robotic gunner Norks, or the electrified floor, it could potentially cause a difficult situation sometimes that makes you have to handle multiple attacks overlapping at once. Their cool dude sunglasses are a nice touch also, as it works with the punk aesthetic that they're going for. And the aforementioned gunner Norks aren't difficult on their own like most enemies in the game, but the 3 projectiles they shoot in rapid succession can be overwhelming when you're accompanied by more than one of their kind all at once. With 400 gems to collect and a large level that's split within 2 sections, the front half is heavily shrouded by small crevices and plants that are quite popular for hiding singular gems beneath the large leaves. The back half involves a large amount of climbing stairs and glides to platforms before repeating it all again, which kind of feels like a drag. The backtracking asks the player to redo glides 2 or maybe even 3 times to fully complete everything. And it really bogs down the pace of the level once you've collected everything and defeated all the enemies on your first time through. Stone Hill is most likely the very first level a new player would experience. And it's a brilliant way to ease them into the game. It's got bright blue skies and a lush field of green that are a perfect backdrop for the seaside hilltop. There are several tunnels that stretch beneath the green hills that connect small rooms or other sections of the map that are independent of one another. The many towers with flags flowing creates a welcoming sight that's reminiscent of the Artisan's homeworld, and it's not a level that you should be afraid of. It's an iconic level with its recognizability from the veterans of the franchise. We do have unique enemies of the rams here, and they're a delight to head into charging matches with. The shepherds are a perfect fit for being a land full of livestock with the rams and sheep, but sometimes I can feel that the reach on their cane swings can be a little bit deceptive, but it's never anything I'm actively ever worried about. Also, this could potentially be the first time you're introduced to an egg thief in the game. And while the majority of them can be buggers with how fast they can be, this one tends to be a bit on the easier side with his pace. he tends to take a few of his corners pretty wide when he's up against the coastline, which gives you ample spacing to catch up to him. This is the first and only level really within the Artisan homeworld that shows off the potential and open-endedness of the game. While the lower sections of the level retain the qualities of other levels, such as branching paths that are secluded and walls to keep you enclosed, once you glide to the upper hilltops above and around them, the vastness of the entire level opens up. Stray gems could be hidden around who knows where, and sometimes they send you on a wild goose chase looking for that random single one that you overlooked. This sometimes makes it feel like a bit of a chore to hunt everything down sometimes, depending on how diligent you've been with your run. The hidden beach section behind the return home pedestal, housing the key, was all but impossible for me to find as a child growing up. And the accompanying hidden well that you had to drop down to use said key was just another kick while I was down. Looking back, it's phenomenal as it really starts to show the player that you're rewarded for thinking outside of the box and having good map awareness to look in places that you wouldn't normally think in order to achieve full completion. The peach-tinted skybox of Nasty's World is here as well. The industrial sounds of all the barrels and Norks pairs nicely with the piano chords in the background. The collection of ships, storage crates, barrels, and everything else really sells the design that this is a shipyard with the express purpose of production and building. I am really glad that we get to see unique enemies for all of Nasty's levels. The sweat and muck-covered aprons and gloves are a nice way to show the dirty conditions of the world, as well as the rigorous conditions that the Norks are living in. I like the small Norks being balanced atop the metal barrels as it adds a unique character design to an otherwise basic enemy. The large Norks requiring 2 hits is reminiscent of some other large enemies in the game that need more than just a regular flame attack. Whether that's the use of metal barrels being flung at them or TNT barrels exploding in their faces. But it's a fairly linear level through the most part. It doesn't really ask too much of the player with absurd glides, hidden secrets, or difficult enemies to fight. All in all, it's a pretty middle of the pack level, which is rough considering it's one of the final levels in the final world of the game. The underwater maintenance tunnels at the end of the level acting as a makeshift pathway hub is cool design though, and a small callback to Nasty's World. But I do wish, however, that each path had more behind them that led to other parts of the shipyard. I think if the level was more so built around this aesthetic rather than the above ground means of production, it would receive higher marks for standing out more. Jacqu has a unique skybox that stands out drastically from the pinks and purples of other Dreamweaver levels. The clashing colors is a cool approach to setting this level apart. There are no playful tones of blue. Everything is vividly orange and red, and it's a nice surprise. The spiky cliff edges stand jarringly compared to the relaxing floating islands of the Dreamweaver's world. The obsidian-toned rocks really sell the feeling of being in an almost volcano-esque style of level. While the Dreamweaver castle structures are still within the level, I feel they largely take a back seat compared to the harsh edges of the blackened rocks and mountainsides. The boss arena really sells this fact as it truly feels like a bubbling caldera. As for the enemies, I really don't know what the deal with them is. Enemies that used to look like malformed zombies in the original retain most of those characteristics, but they're pretty disappointing when put into action. The male zombies require charging while the females need to be flamed is a nice mixture of Spyro's abilities, but for enemies within the penultimate boss fight for the game, they pose basically zero threat. Lots of them don't even move, they just kind of stand around on their pedestals and wait for you to get close. and 9 times out of 10, you're able to react to them before they can react to you. And speaking of zero threat, Jacqu himself is like the majority of other Spyro bosses. He's just a glorified enemy that requires multiple hits to defeat, but doesn't have any attacks to make him actually dangerous to be around. Chances are you could get him to hop through the entire arena to the end without even allowing him to throw a single box attack at you. I mean, how does something like that even pass as a boss enemy? This is a very short level compared to the vast expanses of the rest of Dreamweavers. While it does house 500 gems like all the others, they fly by in an instant. I'm not sure if that's because most of the gems are 5s and 10s, or if it's just because of how tightly packed the level is. It doesn't take long to encircle around both pathways that connect and lead down to the boss fight, and I can praise the hidden puzzle to make the super glide over to the second dragon. Hitting a fool that's nowhere near the elevated pedestal and out of sight in order to lower it took me ages to figure out as a child. All the other ones you could see exactly what happened when you hit him, but for some reason trying to wrap my brain around the fact that I could hit him and he could affect something elsewhere in the level was not something I was capable of. And if you couldn't figure that out, constantly seeing the dragon across that expanse wiggling drove me mad. The section of the level rewards the player for outside of the box thinking and being quick with their level knowledge to make it to the platform before it raises itself back up. I absolutely love the bright orange skybox. The large clouds descend down like a mist atop the smog-spewing structures of the harbor is a beautiful picture. I like the profuse amounts of strange liquids being piped and pumped throughout this level. The shoddy wooden platforms and messily laid bricks are a nice aesthetic when coupled with the industrial piping all around. It really shows that this level was not meant to look nice. It's a nasty level with a nasty atmosphere. The tall smog towers always present in the background is a nice touch just to show how much influence Nasty has had on the Dragon worlds. The many different building structures all around the harbor add to the design that this is a place of production above all else. And the lighthouse in the middle of the bay, surrounded on all sides by the harbor, is a cool focal point of the level that's always visible. However, that's where the majority of my praise ends for this level. I cannot forgive the horrible fact that they removed the main enticement point of this level for me. This level used to be the absolute peak of Spyro difficulty back in the day, and they nerfed the biggest part of it. I cannot believe that Toys for Bob removed the guns from the Norks. I mean, it does make perfect sense, and I completely understand why having Norks shooting off literal rifles could never be published. But that was my favorite part of this level in the original. The mixture of the small Norks shooting at you while the larger commando Norks shot in repeating arc patterns made for a combination of projectiles that was just entirely overwhelming to young me. The fact that they shoot custom-made sludge launchers now is more on par for the design of the world, level, and game with the rebranding that Toys for Bob did. But I can't help but feel let down that such an integral part of the hardest level in the game before the final boss lost one of its main charms to me personally. It's a linear level with small branching or hidden paths above and around corners, and I don't feel completing the level 100% is ever annoying. I usually look forward to this level, though having to run up and down the supercharge pad 2 separate times, once for the ramp up and once for the locked chest below, can feel a bit like a slog that slows the pacing. I do love the absurd number of enemies in this level, and the fact that every single one of them has some form of projectile being lobbed or thrown at you really sets the stage for a difficult level to fully complete. It does feel like the penultimate level before the final boss of the game. This level is special and I want to love it, but the letdown of the rebrand I feel prevents it from being higher up on the list. I remember being so excited when this game first released and being able to load in and hoping that they had kept those guns, because it was the main defining piece of this level for me. And the dejection I received after loading in was so disheartening. As much as I want to give it high remarks, it just doesn't hold a candle compared to the original version. I guess you could say I feel conflicted about this level at the end of the day. Dark Hollow's nighttime aesthetic is a joy to explore, with the dark tones being illuminated by the candles strewn all about. The bass line of the music vibes in a fantastic tone, and the underground section being hollow and repurposed to an almost dungeon state with a hidden library is a wonderful redesign that Toys for Bob did. Potentially, this is the first time that you encounter a Nork or an enemy that can harm the player. It introduces not just Norks that require the player to charge with their horns, but also large enemies that force a flame attack. There's ample time to react before any of these can swing at the player, meaning there's likely not a chance you'd see any damage ever get inflicted here. The heavier armor-clad Norks in the library are a cool almost puzzle element to dealing with an enemy, showing that you can't just brute force your way through everything in the game. Also, I remember they used to scare me as a child in the original. Dark Hollow is a small, contained level that is relatively easy to clear out. It's only one small branch off to the library, which ultimately doesn't take too much time to go out of your way in order to fully explore. A straightforward and linear level that serves as a great introduction to several beginner elements of the game. Both enemy types of charge and flame, with locked chests requiring keys to be opened, as well as small hidden alcoves that ask the player to glide to that are above your eye line. It all rewards good exploration, and is a perfect way to start off one of the beginning levels of the game. This is a worn-torn desert with large, loud trumpet fanfare, and it is a great representation of the Battleborn Dragon's homeworld. The sandstone rocks serve as a natural contrast to the artificial building structures that are periodic with their appearance. The rhythmic drums complement the deep bass line as a backdrop or exploring the Norks dressed in old-timely war uniforms. The purple goop serves as a good juxtaposition to the orange rocks that are safe to walk on, similar to Spyro's bright purple and orange color palette to stand out against the natural tones of the level. I do really enjoy the differently colored hats pertaining to the Norks. It's a nice touch to separate the ones that are the lackeys and the generals that man the cannons. They're hilarious to try to watch the fight, but turn tail when you actually get close and run at them. I'm so glad that Toys for Bob kept the mooning disrespect from the original game. They aren't a threat at all in any shape, but it's a hoot to chase after the cowards. The looping design of the level is good, as it allows you to run through collecting what's easy to see. Should you miss something, it's easy to glide back to the beginning and start a new loop. The back section of the level being secluded from the rest by a large target rock is a nice touch to not have to leave everything out in the open. The glide to the small alcove that houses the locked chests is a pain though. If you miss it, you'd have to reset through the entire level in order to get to the position to try again, which, should you miss it a second or third time even, adds up to be a real hefty time sink of just running around. I have relatively fond memories of my mom actually being the one to suggest shooting the cannon at the target rock in the original. Little me never thought that that's necessarily what it was implying to do, though I don't remember ever really being stuck on the level. More so she just suggested, hey, why don't you shoot the target? And we went from there. It's one of the few memories that are still relevant today of the world that I think of every time I load into it. The harp-like musical notes radiating outward feel like they're being sung from the very clouds far in the distance. The deep purple and blue reaches of the sky give me a sense of utmost tranquility that truly feels like I'm reaching the loftiest sense of pure and absolute relaxation. The Dreamweaver's bread and butter of glowing stars and floating castle islands is ever prevalent here. As such, good gliding is rewarded with exploring new islands in pathways that are hidden. The brightly colored stones that make up the lofty castle itself feel like they're made from materials not of our world. However, as many floating islands as there are, aside from the ending one with the large fountain, I feel like there's not enough variance to separate them from each other. Each collection of islands that dot the borders of the castle feels rather similar to all the other ones around. The interior of the castle feels rather drab and dingy, and doesn't quite match the airy and mystical vibes given off by the outside. While I don't like the inside of the castle, I do really like the little dolphin dogs. The noises they make when defeated are the best part of their design. The Devils of Dark Passage make an appearance here, and we're given another variant of an invincible enemy that requires a mechanic to defeat when talking about the floating Norks. Though, for something so late into the game, I feel nothing in this level really poses any threat whatsoever at all. The biggest killer in this level is the vastness of the gliding that needs to be done. It's a wide level that I feel can sometimes get confusing with where you've been and where you still need to go. The central island is crowded with multiple layers and pathways that can hide gems, and several collections of small floating islands that encircle it look vaguely similar, so sometimes I feel like it could be easy to mistake one for a section you've already completed, and therefore miss gems atop it. The interior glide section within the castle is fun, but kinda sucks when you miss one of the fairies or floating Norks. And the supercharge puzzle at the peak of it is cool, but it doesn't serve purpose really aside from getting to the ledge right after it. I feel like the supercharged sections in other levels were done better, and they felt more relevant and inclusive to the level with their usage, rather than kind of being shoehorned in for one glide's purpose at the very end. Let me be perfectly clear here. The murky atmosphere is on point. The swamp trees are an amazing aesthetic. The moaning in the background of the music mimics bullfrogs' croaks. The water is the perfect amount of murkiness, and the small islands just barely poking above the surface of it is a great design choice. The dragons being nature focused about the health of the swamp and the land is good as well. It gives them a sort of druidic vibe going on. The design of nature being brought into a future with electricity and industrialization is harming the natural order, and that makes for a cool problem to try to fix in the world. The swamp temple, hidden away at the end of the level, is a nice set piece to explore. The electric Norks that are commonplace at the beginning and end of the level aren't too annoying or special, but I do like how they're an environmental enemy as opposed to something that will try to harm Spyro directly. I do enjoy how rocking they are, with shocking the ground all around them and just trying to have a good time at the end of the day, but they aren't really anything too spectacular. The pigs from our dreaded Misty Bog show up here as well, but they don't really feel like much other than a slightly tankier version of the rams all the way back from Stone Hill. The 300 gems spread around the level is not really too daunting of a task to ask for the player to collect. It's pretty linear with small branches to individual islands which don't really require too much time to fully complete. The glide over to the tree housing, the key, isn't difficult really, and doesn't require a huge amount of backtracking to get to the locked chest, as it's right within the temple grounds right next door. It does get bonus points for the hidden area down the well though, because even in today's day and age, I still sometimes forget that there's gems down there, even though there's a level. All in all, Beastmakers was my favorite level growing up as a child, but unfortunately that place has been taken over by another level later on in our ranking. Once again, I'm a huge sucker for orange skyboxes set late at evening. The Nasty's World motif that plays upon entering serves as such a good foreboding manner of foreshadowing for what will ultimately become the end of your journey. The interior section of the castle housing the dogs and shepherds stands out with its purple tones against the bright orange outside. I wonder where we've seen something like this before already. Progressing around the outside ramparts of the castle feels great, as though you chase down the sheep on stilts with the evening sky illuminating up above. For the enemies, we do get to see our old shepherd friends again from the Stone Hill, but this time they're accompanied by the dogs. And this is the first time you're introduced to an enemy that requires more than just a single hit to dispatch properly. The surprise initially received when the dogs don't collapse after being flamed, but instead change their fur to a blackened char and grow angry, is shocking to most newcomers. Toasty himself has always been a super cool aesthetic though. A scarecrow with a pumpkin for a head and an amazing scythe in charge of a castle is so immaculate. And the joking manner that he's actually just an angry sheep standing on stilts is such a comedic way to end the first true real big bad of the first world. It's a very short 100 gems linear level that's almost impossible to miss anything. There is one singular branching path that leads you outside again once you get into the castle, but it's nowhere near a level that feels like a drag to have to play through, as there's not really anything negative that stands out to me. As long as you remember to check the side path along the edge, the level shouldn't give you any trouble. I do have fond memories, or maybe not so fond, of the dog hiding around the ledge corner outside. It used to jump scare me as a child. Back before the days of a free rotating camera, there was no way to tell what was around the corner. And the last thing you were expecting after a harsh 90-degree turn was for a dog to start yapping and barking and jump on you so suddenly. The high caves have a similar mountainous design to every other part of the Magic Crafter's world, as there's not a whole lot that would make it stand out from any other level in the world. It's pretty generic. The plethora of cave networks that run through the mountain are the main enticement point of the level in my opinion, however. The back half of the level is unique with a large clearing above an open expanse that lets you supercharge freely over it. The many different cavern openings and the cliff sides is a cool design, but once you get to them, they're actually just mostly like murky tunnels more than anything else. As much as I want to applaud this level, it feels rather samey to everything else that we've seen in the world. I can, however, praise the sheer scale of the mountains. It truly does feel like you're in the highest mountain range and exploring caves beyond normal reach. The metal spider enemies at the start of the level were the stuff of nightmares in the original game. The revamp retained their heavily metallic qualities, but they certainly toned down the horror factor. Thanks for that one, Toys for Bob. The more quirky mage boys, which are fun to deal with because they don't really play by conventional enemy rules, are back and at it again. The whirlwind magicians are a one-time encounter, which is interesting, and they pose another unique environmental hazard to the player. And the long-bearded ice mages that live throughout Magic Crafter's levels appear all over. High Caves has 500 gems and plenty of hiding locations that are very easy to miss. This is a true level that tests the player's exploring habits and really starts to ask them to be hyper aware of new locations to try to reach and think of. The supercharged section is fun to leap over massive gaps as well, and turn harshly to charge through the large metallic spider caves. The 2 egg thieves are relatively easy, especially with the help of Mr. Turntable, like always. The introduction to the super breath happens here, and it's cool to get served 2 new abilities back to back for completion in a single level. It's a large one that probably would take quite a while to fully complete on a first playthrough, and might actually serve as the first true challenge of full completion for new players. At the end of the day, High Caves is a level that's noteworthy to me for nostalgic purposes, but looking back at it compared to our competitors later on coming up, it might not stand the strongest against the test of time. This is the best looking flight level, hands down. The nighttime skybox is beautiful, and the brightly glowing crystals of all different colors stand out fantastically. The soft bass tones strumming gently in the background almost serve as a good subduer of thoughts, like a white noise machine gently lulling you to sleep at night. The waterlogged township where the arches and lighthouses are is a cool, unique set piece. And the lighthouse glow in the ambient light that radiates outward shines fantastically atop the rocks and crystals strewn about. The rings, as an objective, are straightforward and easy. The chests are probably the hardest objective with how small they are, and they can definitely prove to be annoying occasionally. Sometimes the angles feel a bit harsh with how you're expected to tilt and pan to stay on course successfully. The arches and lighthouses being static makes them easy to collect, though the lighthouse path can sometimes be a little bit sketchy with which way you're supposed to go. Personally, I think Night Flight is probably the second hardest flight level in the whole game. While the first few objectives aren't innately difficult, the small hitboxes of the chests can make them easy to miss if you're banking too fast. And the different height levels require you to tilt and pan down and sometimes draw a little close to the water. The time crunch is really felt once you begin the final push towards the lighthouses, and across all of my playthroughs throughout all of the years, it seems no matter how well I try to fly it, I always hear that pinging of below 10 seconds ringing in my ear, and it's always nerve-wracking. Funnily enough, this was the only flight level I actually failed in the entire playthrough, so kudos to it for actually getting the better of me. Here we see the route of the snow-capped Alpine mountains that are a treasure to look at as they are strewn across all of the Magic Crafters levels. The colorful tapestries within the cavern sections are opulent in design, and the wizard dragons are a fun, unique look for being heavily reliant on magic. The big chasm lakes separating the first half from the second half of the level really sets the tone that this is a world hidden away from almost everything else amidst a sea of snow-clad mountainous peaks. The wizards are more of an annoyance than a real enemy, but that gives them points for being an interesting design. Although I do hate the way that they like to point and laugh at me should I miss them. Their form of attacks function more on manipulating the environment rather than directly trying to harm you, and it makes dealing with them fun. The armored mages are your typical run-of-the-mill charge enemies without too much really to distinguish them. But the storm mages hidden away outside Blowhard's portal at the end of the world are amazing in design. And with their lightning projectiles and storm clouds above their heads, they're hands down one of my favorite designs for enemies. When it comes to playing the level, The egg thief at the beginning can kinda be annoying to try to chase down at the start, and it's especially frustrating when he hops up on that ledge out of your reach and just likes to point and laugh. It always gets under my skin. The second one, once he's outside and in the open, he kinda lacks any real difficulty. The hidden alcove nearby housing the locked chest is tucked just enough out of the way that it's not overly apparent with its presence or where it is. The introduction to supercharge happening here is nice, as it has you barrel down into a contained tunnel section that can't really punish you or take away a life for any missed movements. The key for the chest is actually hidden well in a proper manner that's not easy to find, as opposed to some of the other keys that we've seen so far that are kind of just up on a ledge or out of your reach and require a glide or a higher ledge in order to get to. I'm sure I'm probably a repeating record and beating a dead horse at this point, but the amber evening skyline is just magnificent. The congested nature really does make it feel like the center of a busy township. The signature towers that dot other artisan levels are present here as well, and the winding paths serve as makeshift alleyways that lead to small open clearings before harsh turning again into a new direction. The Matador Norks tie in perfectly with the running bulls. The verticality and upper levels just add to the condensed nature of the level design, and they really try to cram as much as possible into such a small level, and it genuinely works really well. The Matadors are hilarious to watch them try to run from the charging bulls, and speaking of bulls, one of my favorite memories of this level as a child was charging the bulls and getting the gems for them, but leaving them horns buried deep into the ground, jumping angrily. Maybe I was messed up as a child, I don't really know, but it was something about the enemy persisting even after you got their gems that just tickled something in my brain. The unique ways to dispatch them makes fighting them fun, and you get to see different animations based off of whether you're charging them or you're flaming them. But neither the bulls nor the Norks are annoying to have to fight or difficult by any means at all. The real difficulty comes from the egg thief, as he can be a massive turd with his chase route and timings. The condensed linear design of Town Square makes it for a great level to blitz through. It's almost impossible to miss any gems in particular along your way, minus the ones up by the egg thief's route that are hidden away behind the door frame. But we get to see the introduction of popping gem boxes here, and they're fun to gather. We also get our first sight of our favorite Mr. Turntable tumblers, and as we've seen before, they can lead to some interesting methods to get rid of certain enemies should you know how to use them to your advantage. The vertical design of the level keeps you up and around the same sections, which lets you keep tabs on where you've been and should you have missed anything along your way. The upper levels hidden beyond the glide puzzle around the bend of a tower is a nice touch, but it really stings when you're forced to backtrack through should you miss something up there like a gem, or you fail to capture the dragon egg on your first chance of doing so. I remember faintly well the upper ledge housing the final bull and dragon, stumping me for ages as a child. You'd get to the end with the return home pedestal, but you could always see that dragon wiggling up there out of reach of any jump or charge jump or any sort of combination. And I was always unsure on how to get up there as a child, but he was always looming over me. And it's something about that image that serves as a fond memory that stands out very proudly against the other levels that we've seen so far. And I believe that's why Town Square ranks so highly up here. I'll say wild is a pretty good word to describe this place. A cacophony of materials thrown all together all over the place without any real rhyme or reason, it seems. You've got crystals, industrial tunnels, bright greens, and swamp trees. Wild Flight is a mixture of seemingly every other flight level compacted into one, with purple sludge and blue waters alike. What would normally seem like a complete mess of a level is represented perfectly for the chaotic nature that it strives to display. It's a typical flight level, though, with objectives mixed in from other levels, but we do get to see unique boat enemies. The arches, planes, and chests are brought in from flights prior, but the boats are a nice touch to separate Wild Flight. Their erratic patterns seem to take center stage, and they don't really have any rhyme or reason, it seems, to the way that they tend to move. The closeness to them in the water makes flaving them occasionally difficult with the speed that you have to keep, and it really makes you run the risk of messing up at a moment's notice. It makes it really confusing with what you need to prioritize. This is by far the hardest flight level by any means. No contest whatsoever. The erratic flight patterns that you're expected to take seem so wild and uncanny that it almost feels wrong to complete the level. I don't even know if there is an exact best in slot path or order to take the objectives for completion, but the flight seems to require you to mix and match your objectives compared to other flight levels. While you would normally complete one objective and then move on to the next and so on and so forth, Wild Flight asks you to constantly hot swap between objectives for the sake of time, since you really don't have the luxury to be able to go one objective at a time. This flight was rage-inducing to me as a kid with how difficult it was, and I honestly really hated it. But after growing up and playing through it more and more and time again, it's actually become one of my favorite levels overall, and my favorite flight level amidst all of them, just for the pure insanity that it gets to contain. We get to see our top homeworld finally, and what else could it have been? Dreamweavers contains a lavender skybox that is beautiful to look at. I just love the light and airy notes being played in the background. The collection of floating rock islands high in the sky is such a cool aesthetic compared to other homeworlds being down on the ground. It really does add to the ethereal element of the realm in charge of dreams. The dragon's aesthetic of being mystical and celestial beings is a magnificent way to represent the vibe for what the realm serves to do. The combination of open expanse outside with lofty castle designs inside that allow you to climb into higher sections is fun to explore. And the level vastly rewards good gliding as you circle your way around from island to island. The monks are hilarious with their design. They largely give me off a vibe that seems like they're just here to goof off and have a good time rather than actually attack you. But that doesn't mean that they aren't a threat. They most certainly can still smack you around and even take a life should you play careless enough. The concept of the male fools being defeatable by one of two ways based off of their size, while the females are invincible when adult form, is cool, and I believe it's the first time we've had to cope with a truly invincible enemy under normal circumstances. The fools make their first appearance here, and definitely fit their description of being annoyances. I absolutely detested their little whoop sounds they made when you initially got close to them in the original version of the game. They're just massive turds that serve no purpose other than to irritate you and to grind your gears, and they fulfilled that to a T. Dreamweavers is a fun homeworld that rewards good exploration to get to higher up sections of the castle, and while it's a collection of floating islands, the main premise is just gliding around and visiting each of them. Using the light particle cannon to adjust the ages of the female monks to explore higher up areas is a fun twist on unlocking alternative pathways that would lead to more collectibles. There's not much backtracking required, despite there being a whirlwind that literally takes you back to the start of the world, but it's never ever grinded my gears. This is my favorite homeworld design, and the level selection has no discussion necessary about it. Our secret bonus level has a green skybox to match the green dragon head, and it's right on par with Nasty's theme. Nasty's loot matches the junkyard and dragon scrapyard production aesthetic of the world. The metal structures with pipes and pumps dotting the landscape are all too familiar by the point you get to this level. I absolutely love the open expanse that the level provides for you. The free reign of all the different ledges and tunnels are a joy to fly freely around. But it does lose some points for being rather bland when compared to some of the more noteworthy levels in the game. While it's unique with its mechanics, it doesn't stand out enough to crack the top 5 with any super notable features aesthetically. Although I will give a notable mention to the beautiful sight of all those 25 gems at the very end. Nasty's loot is unique, considering enemies, as it consists of only 4 different thieves to chase, so there's not really too much to say about them. We've seen our fair share of thieves sprinting all over the Dragon World, so you'd think we'd be an expert with chasing them down at this point in time. While the first one is relatively easy to chase, it's a joy to cheese the second one with our favorite turntable projectile method again. The third thief can easily be timed to be right in front of us from the moment we reach the top of the stairs, which full-on removes the chase aspect of him. I actually couldn't tell you the last time I actually had to chase this plain boy around. But the fourth thief is the absolute most cheaty thief in the entire game. Maybe second-handed to the one in Clifftown, I'm not too sure. But this guy, his plane engages turbo thrusters at the most opportune times for him to boost away exactly when you get close. If you've played the game, you 100% know exactly how unfair this guy tends to race. I absolutely adore this level. I've heard some people talk negatively about it due to its free-flying mechanic, and I could see how the height limitations that you have to unlock could feel restrictive with areas that you're allowed to freely access when you start the level, but I think it provides actually a unique puzzle element. You see gems, you need to get gems, but you have to figure out how to get high enough in order to reach them. I'm glad we actually got a level that allows Spyro to freely take use of the flying mechanic from flight levels outside of the time trial element that they propose. I love flying around and exploring high structures and over vast crevices without any limitations on how long I can do so. There's no pressure on me, which allows me to freely explore the vastness of the level at my leisure. And who doesn't love picking up insane quantities of 10s and 25s non-stop? This is my favorite level to explore and collect 100%. A little location I like to refer as 25 Heaven locked away within Nasty's quarters will always be one of the top memories that I cherish for playing this game. And I honestly don't think anything will really surpass that feeling of seeing all those gems at the very end of our journey. The Eclipse Skybox. Just look at it. Just look at it. Do I need to say more? Honestly, I feel like that's the main enticing point of this level's appearance. The design is a little dry aside from it, as it blends in almost perfectly with all the other Peacekeeper levels. We see more of the sandstone rocks and small tower structures that are built into the landscape. and the music feels a bit more playful and upbeat than dark and foreboding boss level fights, but the outside is pretty generic. The interior, though, is pretty dope. It's an almost Aztec pyramid in design with the rocks encircling above and around. It kind of feels like a makeshift coliseum built to house an epic showdown between you and him. I will say, speaking of enemies now, the charging small Norks are my absolute favorite enemies in the game. Them getting slapped, unable to see because of their masks, and blindly screaming while they charge forth to their dooms is absolutely hilarious to watch every time. Their bucket helmets are too funny, and the shaman stick mimicking Shemps is a nice touch to their master. And speaking of the big man, I do like his design as he's got some baller sunglasses and a feather hat that he strokes like some slick hairstyle. Even though the Nork women from Clifftown are reused here, we get to see them serving as launching pads for the blind Norks, and that's just too funny to ignore. Shemp's a short level that's condensed pretty tightly. 300 gems comes and goes relatively quickly, and it's difficult to miss anything on your run through. None of the enemies are annoying to have to dispatch to collect their gems. The large glide over to the 25 isolated can be a little sketchy sometimes, but it's by no means the most difficult glide in the game. The locked chest could, however, be an annoyance should you get to that point and you don't have the key, because it would result in quite the large amount of backtracking back through Shemp's arena. But with the key out in the open and up on just a ledge, it's kinda difficult to not get it. All in all, I love this level, and I love Dr. Shemp. He deserves to think he's so cool. Probably because he is so cool. Well, we made it to our top 5, and I don't think anyone's really going to be too surprised by the levels we have here. Ice Cavern is a phenomenal design of a large loop circling around an open expanse. The Aurora Skybox is immaculate, and probably the best one in the game, maybe rivaled by Dr. Shemp's. And the soft chimes complementing the deep grumbles of the groans and drum bellows are a perfect vibe for the scenery. The frostbitten walls are nipped at, and it's beautiful as the cold blue ice serves as a great change of scenery from the copy-paste feeling designs of other Peacekeeper levels. The mixture of the cavernous tunnels and trenches paired with the sheer openness of the main pathway, it really enhances the feeling of being in a frozen cavern with many different natural tunnels to explore and wind through. Within the tunnels, we're introduced to a unique enemy that requires some outside-of-the-box thinking in order to defeat. The heavily armored muscle Norks are a blast to charge headfirst into and send reeling off a cliff's edge into the cavernous expanses far below. The purple power-posing large Norks are also hilarious to watch in the background as you explore. Ice Cavern's a large circular ring of a level that is linear in design, but actually allows for you to go for it forwards or backwards, should you know the secret. Being able to hop up on the little ledge and glide around to the end of the level rewards you with a few extra lives, and is a wonderful concept to allow for an alternative playstyle. There is a small amount of backtracking to handle the locked chest, but I feel like that's only an issue if you go through the level backwards like I always do to grab the extra lives. I would assume if you go through it normally, you'd be picking up collectibles on your way back to the chest. So the only minor issue is the slight annoyance that comes with charging gems off the lampposts, as sometimes I feel like the hitbox accuracy on those things feels shaky and too slim at worst. Overall, Ice Cavern is a glorious level that's immaculate in design all around. I've got great memories of the hidden lives at the end being a secret to figure out how to glide to, and I'm not surprised it's the best level in Peacekeepers and one of the best levels in the whole game. I've actually heard that Treetops is not a lot of people's favorites, so me ranking it all the way up at number 4 might be a bit controversial. But I feel like I've got some pretty good reasons for it. Treetops has a nighttime skybox that's similar in design to other elements of the world, but it's accompanied by large trees sporadically placed far in the distance. And these are trees that are unique to Treetop's design specifically, and not the copy-paste swamp trees of the Beastmaker's levels in Homeworld. The constant auroras flittering their ways across the skyboxes are beautiful to catch glimpses of as well. And the concept of gliding around the peaks of tall trees is an amazing design, and adding supercharge to the inventory of usable abilities makes flying around through the sky and across branches an amazing feeling. The expanse of open space far between each tree requiring either a supercharge or a glide really fits the sheer scale of how high up into the tree line we are, and it really enhances how far away everything is from each other. The monkey enemies here are so much fun to play with, seeing as they aren't conventional Norks or reused pigs from other Beastmaker levels. The small variants get to throw bananas, and they are just typical projectile enemies. And the larger variants are your run-of-the-mill flame enemy. Plus, we get to see miscolored red and green thieves holding 25 gems instead of dragon eggs, and this serves as a nice touch to separate them. I'm not surprised this ranked as high as it did. Its collectability is one of the best. Flying all over all the various trees feels amazing, and while there is quite a substantial amount of backtracking depending on the path order you take when supercharging, it never feels boring, as you're always doing more than just walking from point A to point B. Using glides and supercharge to constantly adjust your position at a sheer speed scale around level adds a brilliant mixture to the formula. The insane supercharge course required to catch the green thief also is insanely fun to run, and it really tests your knowledge and skill of how well the system works and how far you can push it, as it asks you to supercharge up a down ramp. This level's an absolute thrill to explore and complete, unless you mess up the red thief and fall off and have to redo the entire charge all over again like I did. But even still, it's another absurd puzzle piece level that had me stumped as a child. And I remember seeing the faraway Green Thief Island, but had no idea how to get there. I was constantly loading and unloading the game, rinsing and repeating, trying to sprint past all of the enemies in order to keep pace with the Green Thief, in order to see the path that he took, so I knew how to get there. And I love that memory. The starry night sky here is beautiful when paired with the snow-capped mountains of the Magic Crafters. The blue haze tinted over the world separates Wizard Peak from other Magic Crafters levels that utilize the same mountainous region design though. The faraway cliffs in the distance really sell the height of the mountain peaks as the misty fog stretches infinitely below. The monastery designs of the buildings linked between the peaks is a great theme, with opulent rugs and bridges connecting everything together. The windswept trees poking their ways through the cracks in the rock face really add an additional feeling to just how high up the player is due to the profuse winds blowing. I personally feel like Wizard Peak might actually be higher up than High Caves is, and that's probably saying quite a bit. The snow gently falling throughout the outside sections is just the icing on the immaculately designed cake. Within here we get to see our friends the Storm Wizards again, but the main enemies are by far the Ice Wizards from other Magic Crafters levels. We also have abominable Norks brought to life by said wizards, and while they don't stand too differently from other large flame required enemies, their uniqueness with their spawns and color palette at least gives them a slight point. The range on their clubs also feels deceptively long sometimes, which catches me off guard periodically. And so it makes them a joy to fight because there's actually a threat to them. The hidden egg thief on the isolated pedestal might just be enough to drive even the best completionist players mad with his hiding spot, should you not know he's right around them. All in all, Wizard Peak is an absolute delight to go 500 gem hunting through. Supercharge, egg thieves, and gliding puzzles, it comes close to having its cake and eating it. It's a fairly large level, but it never feels like a drag to have to backtrack through and complete everything. It's restricted with its design and doesn't have too many wide open areas where stray gems are mindlessly strewn about. Everything feels like it was placed with a purpose to reward the player for gliding outside the map, supercharging multiple ramps, and just being generally attentive to gem locations. Wizard Peak is 10 out of 10 banger level design. The glide puzzles to get to the high up ledge ice wizards at the start of the level stands out greatly to me. And I remember we only discovered how to do it and how to get up there with the assistance of one of my cousins. That was not anything I would ever think of as a child, to glide outside the borders of the map. So kudos to him for giving us the helping hand there. I'm sure this is probably the 12th time I've said this, but the amber skybox is absolutely beautiful, and the mixture of lavender, which is my favorite color, just gives it extra brownie points. The Dreamweaver stars are ever prevalent here, and the gold trim encircling the structure is ornate with its design as whitewashed stones stand out against the soothing skybox and green grass. The sheer scale of this level is beautiful, as you can see the faraway towers and buildings that are later on. The interior sections being enclosed within really feels like a series of tower rooms that are known for locking away prized possessions and hidden secrets. The yellow lights from the embedded gems within are a nice change of coloration from the peach tints that encompass the outside portions of the level. Our favorite storm wizards make a reappearance here, though they do get a coloration difference from their normal earthy tones. I personally really like this, as I think it fits them in more with the mystical pink colors of Dreamweavers, as opposed to the green crystal tints of the Magic Crafters. The animated armor suits serve as unique enemies and are super cool in design, and they require the Super Flame power-up to defeat, which adds a sense of urgency to try to dispatch as many as you can before time runs out. The grenade Norks, while rather vanilla in design of being projectile enemies, are at least a unique enemy to the level, so I'll give them credits for that. The vastness of Haunted Towers is probably my favorite part of the level. There's just so much to explore and so many ways to go about it. From the isolated opening of the level, to the grounds outside the main towers, to the interior rooms, exploring the battlements outside, and even manipulating the supercharge in ways that rewards expert map exploration and awareness, which allows you to get to the hidden peak at the top of the towers. If you're aware of this fact, you can actually speed through the entire level in order to get the permanent Super Flame power-up, and then backtrack through the whole level to deal with the animated armors and locked chests without having to worry about supercharging or time limits. The freedom offered to the player here with the order in which they want to explore the level to full completion is a huge drawing factor for the level's replayability, and I give it mad props to that. There's a reason it's this high up, but unfortunately, it's still just shy of claiming our top spot. And we finally reach the apex of level design. Dark Passage has a hazy pink skybox that billows soft fog into the far distance that sends a cosmic sense of exploration down my spine every time I first load into the level. Not to mention those guitar chords being power strong with nothing else in the background to kick it off. The unearthly, cavernous walls are otherworldly with their design, and yet the tiled ground still in some portions feel almost deliberately placed with their patterns as opposed to being carved out. The open area where the end of the level lies is fun to circle around, gliding through platforms to reach higher ledges before ultimately encircling up to an overhang with the center. But the best part of this level is the hidden majority of it. The outside ledges that are out in the open really shows off the vastness of the level. Even places you can walk to are slightly obscured by the hazy pink mist of the foggy distance. Gliding over the vastness of the void below is quite the spectacle, and traversing through all of the hidden pathways to travel back and forth between the large two floating islands from each side is a joy to explore before they all ultimately circle back around and spit you out at the end of the level. It truly is vastly linear, and a level that is open enough to obscure the fact that what it really is within its name. A dark passage. With regards to the enemies, however, what did they do to my precious little doggies? They used to be so super cute with their floppy ears and empty little eyes. What in the world are these horrific manifestations now? I understand the realm is focused on dreams, but these are the things of nightmares. It's like they took the 20 years between the original and Reignited releases and spent it inbreeding the poor boys to get whatever monstrosities we have now. The armored turtle enemies are fun to look at when they're in their tiny itty bitty form, but I feel they sometimes react to you and shoot a bit quickly compared to other projectile enemies. It doesn't give you a lot of time to react to them and to get the drop on them first to get rid of them, but I actually like that as it adds threat to them. They share the invincible component of the female monks of the homeworld as well when they're in big form, which is a super nice nod. Here we get to also see the devil enemies with bows that show up in other Dreamweaver levels, and we get to use the fools to adjust the dogs and turtles as a fun game mechanic, and it allows us to manipulate the level in order to fully complete it. I absolutely love going through this level. The linear fashion makes it easy to grab everything on a first run through as long as you're thorough enough. There aren't any wide open sections where stray gems can be hidden away out in the open. Everything's contained just enough to the point that the player can easily maintain eyesight on all collectibles. The majority of the level being hidden behind a lower glide platform is a fun reward for looking around the map once you reach the end. And gliding from island to island back and forth to reach ledges and tunnels that you saw prior in the level is a fun sense of accomplishment to really feel like you're making progress. This is my favorite level. Hands down, no doubt about it. And while I may be incredibly biased, I think it's deserving of the spot. I would give it an absolute perfect score across all of our criteria, were it not for the atrocity that they committed to my small doggy boys. Unfortunately, we can't ignore that. And well, there you have it. All 35 levels of the original Spyro the Dragon ranked from worst to best. At least in my mediocre opinion, that is. I didn't think that this would have turned into such a huge undertaking. All of the hours spent recording, ranking, writing, editing, I'm not even joking. This script is 20 pages long of tiny single-space font, and I even made a legitimate spreadsheet on Excel that details all of my notes and numerical rankings for each category of the levels. The amount of effort and research that went into making this just blew it way out of proportion. But I think coming to the end of it finally here, it's totally been worth it. And before I bid you adieu, I'm curious on your thoughts and opinions. Are there any agreements or disagreements with my thoughts or placements of levels? I'd love to see how my numbers stack up compared to some other people's. Make sure to subscribe and drop a comment for more content of a similar nature. A video of this caliber takes a vast amount of time to create and is no easy feat to edit all alone. I'd like to thank you for sticking around through my mad ramblings while I absent-mindedly talk about something I'm passionate about from my childhood. I appreciate it immensely, and I hope you got some enjoyment out of listening to it. Thanks for the company, and until I next see you, take care of yourself, treat yourself right, and know that whatever's going on, you've absolutely got this. Have a fantastic rest of your day, and I'll see you when I see you.